Jesus said in Mark 6, verse 4, he said, a prophet is honored everywhere except in his hometown and among his relatives and his own family. And he'd returned to his hometown. He'd been doing miracles. He'd been teaching and preaching all over the place. And he returns to his hometown. And rather than those who knew him, giving him his dues and honoring his gifting and saying, isn't it amazing the amount he's achieved in such a small time in ministry? Look at the wonderful things that have happened and these miracles. They began to kind of question, rather than in a kind of wonder, awe-filled way. It was where did he get such teachings? What is this wisdom? What about these miracles? And it kind of sounded all right to begin with, but it led into this kind of offense that they took. Hold on, isn't he just the carpenter's son? We know this guy. He can't be doing this kind of stuff. I'm not going to pay any attention to him. And they took offense. And the Bible records that as a result of that dishonor in his hometown, he was unable to perform any miracles. Just a few healings. Which, for Jesus isn't a great deal, given that everywhere he went, he healed all who came to him. In his hometown, he was barely able to do anything. There is a sense in which when we don't release honor, we stifle and we hinder the supernatural. We hinder the purposes of God. It's like the difference between a pot plant that is watered and well cared for and placed in sunlight and begins to thrive, compared with one that is just ignored and not given water, not given the nutrients it needs, and it struggles. Honor creates an environment for us to thrive in. Having a culture of honor begins to transform how we live and how we operate as family together. And practically, honor involves more than just encouragement. It isn't just picking up on someone's gift and saying you did really well there. That's a big part of it. Encouragement is really important. But practically it involves things like speaking well of one another, whether we're with one another or whether we're not. Not speaking badly behind people's backs, not gossiping, treating one another well, promoting one another, where we have opportunity and we're chatting about, or someone's got this need, to be able to say, this person's really good at that. It's creating an environment where, whether it's behind closed doors or out in the public, we respect one another. And we want to prefer one another. Now, Nikki challenged me to try and think of a time to give a personal story about this. And I thought it was really hard, actually, to think of a time where I've specifically honored someone and it's led to this great impact. And the reason for that, I think, is because honor isn't like a one-time event. It's not when you just give somebody one honoring moment and then the miraculous begins to happen. I think there is an importance about creating a culture of it, that it happens day in, day out. It's consistent. And as we create that culture, that's when things shift. So because I love Mel, my wife, there's a picture of us on our anniversary last year. Oh no, thank you. Because I love Mel, I will seek to honor her. And I, whether consciously or subconsciously, have tried to do that over the last 15 years or so. Maybe a bit longer. We've only been married 14 and a bit, but I was going out there before that. So I've tried to do this consistently, and it is really hard to tell whether my honoring of Mel has made a difference. Because I haven't got, it's quite hard. I'm a scientist. I haven't got like my case study, my normal, where I've not done some honoring to compare it to. It's hard to say what difference there's been. But I try to honor her for the way she handles the daily difficulty of bringing up our kids. Now, it's a joy having children. It's a joy, Pete and Joe. But let's be honest, there are challenges. For most parents, whilst we've picked up stuff from our own parents, we are still learning on the job. It's not like we've studied this and learnt it and got it all down, because every child is different. Every child has their different challenges, and it is difficult. Now, Mel has to look after our kids day in, day out, more than I do, because I go off to work and get to hide in an office somewhere and chat to people who don't have children, and my life doesn't solely revolve around them. But she is a full-time mum. And I honour her for the way she deals with that, because I look after the kids for a few hours on a Saturday morning or something, and by lunchtime, I'm properly strung out. I'm like, how do you cope for a whole week? It would be easy to come home at the end of the day and whinge and moan about my day, but I try to honour her by giving her time to talk about her day. I honour her for the fact that, amidst having to deal with the kids, she's managed to cook dinner, whether it's what was on the menu or not. Either way, it means I don't have to. I honour her for the way she has wisdom in many situations, whether it's with the kids or with others. The way she's able to, draw alongside people and build people up. She does things that I could never do. And I try to honour her for that and hope that actually that enables her to feel confident and to continue doing those kind of things. Hopefully, that honour has built a security and brought out life and love in her and in our relationship. And hopefully it will continue to do so. It has been my experience too. Now, I've got a silly little example really of this. But I've not always been that good at being open and vulnerable. I've often lived with this idea that how I perform and the things that I do are where my value comes from. And so in the past, I would try and hide my mistakes, and I would only show people the good stuff. I had a tendency probably to measure myself against others and to compare myself, and therefore to compete. When someone else was doing something good, I'd be trying to do it better. And I would rely very much on my natural abilities for that. But all of that was based in fear and insecurity, and all of that kind of thrived on that. So it's a silly little example of how things have changed. And I think God has impacted me. I felt his encouragement and his honouring, but actually the community around me and people around me that have spoken stuff in have enabled me to begin to walk out this journey. So a silly little example is this. You probably can't even see what that is. It's a scratch in my car. Technically Mel's car. I did that the other day. I walked past that. I was putting something back in the car, taking a seat out to get something in the car, and I was putting this back in. I walked past and I scratched the car. It's only short, but it's quite deep. And in the past, what would have happened is I would have done that, and then I would have chosen not to mention anything about it and waited for somebody else to notice it, and then probably claimed that I didn't know where it came from. I know, it's pretty dishonest of me, isn't it? But being honest, that's what I would have done, because I hate making mistakes like that and having to own up, because I feel silly, I feel insecure about it, I feel small. It was a silly little thing, but the annoying thing about it was the car was parked in the drive relatively near the fence, and I looked at it and went, yeah, I can probably fit this through there. Turns out I was wrong. I should have moved the car. And I knew that before I did it, but I was in a bit of a rush and I chose not to, so I felt pretty silly, but I owned up. And a few years ago, I probably wouldn't have done that. And there's something about the way that God honours us and the way that a community of people honours us that calls out maturity within us and calls us to change. That's a silly little example, but that is a change in me. I'm able to own up to my mistakes more. I'm able to not have to give in to my insecurities and to live out of a place of security in God. I know that having done that won't change how Mel really feels about me. Hopefully. I know that it doesn't change how God feels about me. There's something in me that has changed, and I've become more secure as people have honoured and encouraged and drawn out my vulnerabilities. Our insecurities and our need for showing ourselves as important is a real hindrance to honour in our community. Many of us struggle with this. I still struggle with it. It's not like I'm perfect. It's not like if I made a bigger mistake, I wouldn't hide it. I don't know. You never know. Whether we think it actively or subconsciously, it's a fear-based response. And that is something that God doesn't want in our lives. Insecurities like this rob us from being able to honour one another, and actually even from being able to receive honour and encouragement from people. It robs us of our freedom, and it's a thing we need to take to God and get our healing over. When my children operate this way, and they're competing and it gets a bit nasty at times, all the scolding and telling off in the world is not actually going to help that situation. What they need to know is that they are loved and secure, because that's what undoes the competition. They don't need to do that anymore when they've already received unconditionally that love and security and acceptance. And we need the same with our Father. You know, again, as an example with Beth here, we went to a parents' evening a little while back, and one of the things that was mentioned was she was pretty good at maths. I mean, not Pete Ingleby good at maths, but pretty good. She's good at maths. But the thing they noticed was that she didn't like to take on new challenges where she didn't already know stuff she wouldn't try. There was a fear within her of getting stuff wrong. And, you know, I don't want that for my children. I've lived with that for quite a long time myself. That if I can't guarantee the outcome of getting something right, I'd be fearful of taking that step. And so we and her teachers and those around her began to actively try and encourage the effort that she was putting in, the trying rather than the end result. And it's quite a well-known thing, you know, that this is the way we're called to, you know, try and bring stuff out of our children and draw them out as confident children. And, you know, something in her has changed. You can see by the mistakes that she's made and crossed out and put in. She's been willing to try it, and she is much more confident in that now. And I want to suggest that as a community, we need to do the same kind of thing. We need to praise the effort and the risk-taking and the stepping out rather than just the results of when we get stuff done well. Because with the supernatural, with working in gifts like healings and miracles and prophecy, we cannot guarantee the outcome because that does rely on God. Our part is to step out in boldness and in faith in him, knowing that we're secure and that we're just following his call. I want a culture like that for my kids. I want a culture like that for us as a church. Because imagine what happens when we are that secure through honoring one another, knowing that when we step out, even if we make a mistake and it's horrendous, there's a community around us who will honor the effort and the risk, and they will encourage us and they will praise us regardless of that outcome. We become a community that then is dynamic and transformational and secure. It becomes attractive to people because it's not what people in the world experience. Success is praised in the world, but God praises faithfulness and risk. And a culture of honor does that for us. So insecurities are a hindrance, but pride is also a hindrance. It's on the other end of the scale because both are actually all about me. When I'm proud and someone tries to honor me, I go, yeah, I do deserve that. Aren't I great? Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you could also now honor me, that would be wonderful. We take it as kind of our own reward rather than what God intended. And it comes back to me again. And both our insecurities and our pride rely about what we think about ourselves rather than what God says about us. Both are hindrances. We are called to a culture of honor. It says this in Romans 12, verse 10. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. I want to encourage us to get competitive. Not against one another, but in showing how much we can honor one another. Looking for those opportunities where we can draw out God's gifting. Where we can draw out each other's identity in God. Because when we do that, I know that there is a smile from heaven and God becomes present in our awareness. Let's be people who give honor and encouragement to one another in genuine love, because this passage in Romans 12 is set in the context of love in action. The reason I honor my wife and my kids is because of my love for them. It isn't something I have to actively try to do. It's a natural outworking. Let's be genuinely affectionate and loving towards one another, not pretending and just honoring in public, but doing it day in, day out, behind closed doors and in public. Let's be those kind of people who hold to what is good and praise the good and the effort and the trying. Let's not be lazy in using our own gifts, but where people encourage us, let's be bold in stepping out in them, not fearing getting stuff wrong and having our security placed in the right place, which is in God. You know, this is precisely what families that work well and function well look like. Parents speaking well of their children, encouraging them, encouraging their effort, sacrificing to help them go beyond where they could have gone themselves. You know, that is my desire for my kids. I don't want my kids limited by the fears that I have. I want them to go beyond that. I want them to be free in their outwork, and I want them to be bold and courageous in stepping out and taking those risks, whatever the outcome might be. Children speaking well of one another rather than competing, praising one another for the stuff they do, rewarding each other with their words and their encouragements. Children speaking well of their parents, parents speaking well of one another. That's what families that work well look like. And that is what we are called to as a body, as a family, as a church. When we moved into this place, there was that prophetic word given about a family having come to town. This is the kind of family God calls us to be, because it is inclusive, it is attractive, it honors one another, it takes that honoring out into the world, it brings an encouragement and a positivity that the world desperately needs. And it is what was modeled in the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a mutual honoring and encouraging and praising and blessing of one another that spilled over into creation through love, that resulted in all of us and an invitation to be part of that family. Isn't that something that you'd be proud to be part of? You are part of it. This is what we're called to, and I want to encourage us to take that honor and that encouragement as powerful things. Let's not ignore it. Let's not withhold it. Let's release it, because as we do so, we will create a transformational community that releases that supernatural gifting of heaven on earth, which I think, and I hope I'm not wrong, is what we actually truly desire for our church and for the world. So I'm just going to pray, and I want to encourage us to actively choose to jump in on this, because it is quite simple, and you might want to spend some time in your connect groups looking at how you can be honoring and encouraging in different situations, because it might be different in your family life, to your work life, to your community life around your home, and in the church. But let's be people who will get practical with it. You know, it's not just theory, it's actually quite easy to do, and when we do it, it really brings life into people and it transforms our world. So Father, I want to thank you that you are you're not just a God who is distant, but you're a God who has drawn near. And that you did so because of that honoring, blessing, encouraging community you already had in the Godhead, and it's spilled over. You're a God who has modeled what it is to be family and community. You're a God who modeled the outworking of love, not just in words, but in practical ways. You didn't just say you loved us, you sent your Son to die for us, to draw us in and bring us into that community again. And Lord, I want to pray that we would take hold of this and be a community of people who build a culture of honor, that we operate as the family of God on earth, that is inclusive and welcoming and attractive and draws out our true identity, that calls us to maturity, that calls us to step out in boldness and faith with our gifts for the benefit of one another and for the world around us. Lord, would you help us with that? And where we have insecurities and where we have pride, Father, would you speak into that and help us to, instead of believing what we think about ourselves, to believe what you say about us. And Lord, I pray even now you'd speak to each of us in this room. You would speak your words of honor and encouragement and of how proud you are of each of us. That you would speak to those things deep inside of us that need drawing out. Transform us so that we can then go out and transform our world. In Jesus' name. Amen.